All right, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Vernon Wall, the Director of Business Development for LeaderShape, and we are just excited that you are here to join us for our seventh and final series of virtual conversations that we're providing for leadership educators. We had over 2,300 people registered to engage in our first six series, and we're excited to be back for round seven. And this is actually our last session of the seventh. And the purpose of our time together is to share questions, thoughts, and best practices as we continue to reimagine how we deliver engaging leadership programs to students through virtual platforms. I know that it's one of those things where you know Zoom. I don't know if there's anyone who has not been a part of our experience virtually over the past few months that doesn't know Zoom. But we will always want to show this slide around thinking about the fact that we are in a virtual platform and we're going to engage folks. We encourage you to be engaged in the chat. What we found over the past few sessions is that people really use the chat not only to ask questions of our facilitator, but also to talk with each other and share resources. So definitely engage that throughout. So, and we're gonna ask, we typically, since we only have an hour together, we're asking that folks not unmute and ask questions, but use the chat to do that. Because we have such a large number of folks that are joining us, it'd be difficult for us to do that. So thank you for that. I do want to share, and if Jamie, you could move to the land acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Do want to share our land acknowledgement. LeaderShape would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that the land each of us is on today is the original homelands of indigenous and tribal nations. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from these territories, and we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land. Please honor and acknowledge the Native and indigenous peoples from the land that you're joining us from, and give thought to your ancestry and the generations that came before you. I'm coming to you from Washington, D.C., actually, which is the ancestral homelands of many Native and indigenous tribes, but primarily the Anacostic and the Piscataway. For those of you who don't know us in terms of LeaderShape, wanted to just share with you our vision and mission. Our vision is a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. And our mission is to transform the world by increasing the number of people who lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible. That's who we are. If you Google the term leadership, I'm sure you will find many different definitions. And at LeaderShape, we believe that leadership involves living in a state of possibility, making a commitment to a vision, developing relationships to move vision into action, and sustaining a high level of integrity. Effective leadership takes place in the context of a community and results in a more equitable society. To say that I'm excited to have our facilitator join us is an understatement. The Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, who is actually a member of our board at LeaderShape and is an internationally renowned social justice educator and scholar, and a tremendous friend and colleague. It is truly an honor that we are able to spend this time with the Reverend Doctor. So just want to give Jamie an opportunity to say hello and introduce himself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I see my friends. Hey, Craigie, and Alex, and so many other wonderful faces that are there with us today. Vernon Wall and I go way back to when he babysit babysat me as a young child. But he has been my dear friend and colleague for many years, and I have a deep, deep love and passion for leadership and particularly LeaderShape. And so the opportunity to have a conversation, particularly in this contextual moment around Black men and Black male leadership, felt um, like a great thing to do. So thank you so much for taking out your Friday afternoon. Maybe some of you, depending upon where you are, it's still Friday morning, right? I've already said very clearly to Vernon, we are in happy hour space. So there's any, I don't know what I'm going to be saying. So thank you so much for being here, having me.
I'm so excited that you're joining us. I noticed that folks are putting in the chat box their name and pronouns and where they're joining us from. Please continue to do that so we can see who's here and so that everyone else can engage who's here and be able to see that. So thank you. We're excited about this. I did want to, before I turn it over to Jamie, share with you leadership. There's an interesting thing that within our institute, our 4 and 6A Institute, we have a section where we talk about equitable leadership. And I just want to share with you that what we at LeaderShape believe is that leaders who seek to create equity engage in conversations about identity and equity with courage and curiosity, understand the complex ways that systemic inequality operates, recognize that social positionality informs their perspectives, reactions, and interactions, and act strategically within the spheres of influence to create a more equitable environment. And I believe that that's a great sort of entree into this conversation as we think about Black men and supporting them in leadership programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, and thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much, Vernon. And again, as I said, Jamie, he, him, his pronouns, and I am joining you from the original ancestral homelands of the Piscataway tribal nations here in the Baltimore, Washington area. And so when asked and invited to share with you all this afternoon in this conversation, I thought a lot about what it means for us as leadership educators, as folks who are working to cultivate and prepare the next generation of leaders, and what that means in the context of serving, working on behalf of Black males. And so today, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time offering some questions and speaking to a few things that matters to me around that. I don't, in this space, show up as the only authority, is the all-knowing around kind of Black male experiences and the experiences of Black men in higher education. Having served in and having been for over 40 years a Black male in the context of higher education, I might have a little bit to say about it. And want you to, all of the other voices that are in this space, to share your wisdom and your thoughts as we move through as well. We're going to try to create an opportunity for some engagement, and we're going to use the technology Poll Everywhere. So we've already named, and you are already using your chat to put in questions and or comments, so continue to do that. But we're going to also invite you to use Poll Everywhere to just capture some community responses and engagement, right? All of us have been invited into these little boxes, right? And this is how we engage with each other in the world right now. And in order for it just not to be didactic and just one voice talking let's try to get more voices in the space. So if you'll log in to pollev.com/Jamie Washing 110, all caps, that will invite you, that'll get you to the registration page if you haven't done this before with me. And in that registration page, you will find an invitation to put in your email address and then a user name, then a password. That will then launch the opening page, which will ask you for a username. The username is Jamie Washing 110. That will get you into the polls that we will be using today. You can also text Jamie Washing 110 to 37607 and follow the same steps. It will invite you again to register with an email and then follow that by a password, getting you into the polls where you'll have the username Jamie Washing 110. Again, this technology is to invite us to engage, to create more voices, space for more voices, not to create agita. So if it's hard and it's not working, just put your responses in the chat. That's fine. And we'll just keep it moving. Okay. Thank you so much. So we're going to use this poll everywhere, just right at the beginning, because I want to capture kind of who's with us in the room. And we will go from there. So the first poll that you're invited into is what type of campus are you serving on, right? So let's see who's in the room. Am I at a PWI, an HSI, HBCU, a community college, MSI, Anna University, or none of the above? I'm here and I'm not a part of a campus necessarily. Okay, all right? Yeah, yeah. So we get to see who's in the room with us today, and that's a context thing as we consider our work with Black men. Thank you very much. All right. I'll close the poll by counting down 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you. So again, about 78% of us are at PWIs. As we notice, as reflected in this poll, we don't have anyone here in that's working with coming from an HBCU. And I want us to hold the importance of the context, right? Where we're talking about we're working with and or serving Black men. So that's a different dynamic. For community colleges, HSIs, and then none of the above. All right, let's go to the next question. In what roles do you serve at your institution? So let's see what roles people are saying that they serve. Are they advisors? Are you directors, administrators? What's the role that you're serving in your institutional organization? Okay. I see directors. I see some directors. Okay. 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 Leadership development, director of leadership and education development. What else have we got in the room? All right. Okay, director of public affairs, right? Just see who we are. What's in this space? So for fraternity sorority advisors, okay? Yep. Good. Leadership studies. Let's see who's in the room with us. Coordinators for leadership. Yep. Just giving us a few minutes to get those in. Program managers, administrators, leadership development. Student tours. Cool. Okay, multicultural affairs folks, right? Fraternity sorority life. Just giving us a sense of the environments or the venues in which the roles that we have, the spheres of influence, right? As we come into the space. So I want you thinking about that as we move into this next, as we move into our conversations today around kind of where do I work with and have access to and connect with, right? Thank you. All right. The next question. I want to do a feeling check. So if you were to capture, and I'm not asking you to feel like you've got to speak on behalf of, but I want you to think about if I were to do kind of like a feeling check as I listen to, am I engaged with, what's the feelings that you would say that Black men on your campuses have? They feel, Black men feel what? Based upon your relationships, your engagement, what would you say Black men are feeling, particularly in this contextual moment in time? Just let's see what we got, okay? Unheard, invisible, frustrated, right? Okay, what's this stuff? Emotional, lots of emotional, detached, okay? Unsafe, okay? Tokenized, there we go. We see it, targeted. Pride in self, cautious about institution. Yep. one of the things that feels very important, and please continue to do this, is that as we're considering our work with and on behalf of Black men, we simply cannot just operate at the head action level. And what I experience so much is, here's the information that we know, this is what we should do, right? And so there's a missing and a disconnect from the emotional level dynamic and emotional knowing and intelligence that must be engaged if anything that we do is going to be effective. Is that making sense? Right? So we can't simply just know stuff, read research, read articles, heard stuff, and then move into doing action without considering the emotional space of work and where people are at an emotional level. So folks feeling targeted and unheard, feeling pressured, feeling invisible, feeling misrepresented, that's the feeling level, right? We got to do work with that. We have to work through that, right? We have to first acknowledge that that's a real thing, and that that doesn't make us wrong or problematic. It's real. And so we see the larger responses are targeted, pressured, and isolated, right? And so what does that mean in terms of the work that we do in leadership development? And how do we pay attention to that specifically? All right, take a deep breath. Good stuff, y'all, good stuff. Just a couple more. All right. So what's been your experience in engaging Black men in leadership programs or leadership efforts? So it doesn't have to be just a specific, your emerging leader program or whatever, but as you do your leadership development work, what's it been like as Black men have participated, whether it's in the class or in the session? Thank you, Shaquana, for non-existent. Like I hear this often, that it's so hard, and very rarely are we able even to get Black men to participate in things, right? So what's that experience been? Okay, all right. So a 3-day leadership retreat. Okay, very limited involvement. Okay. Standalone workshops. Okay. Workshops in dialogue spaces. A few present in leadership classes. Very limited. Just pay attention to, again. So again, what often happens in terms of this question here is I feel inadequate as a facilitator, right? That because of lack of practice and experience, folks often feel like not sure of how to engage or what it means, and how to be successful, how to invite in and to represent the experience and voices in a way that feels honoring and respectful of the Black male experiences. Okay, right. So some openness because of my presented identities, how I show up. No Black male participants over the past year. Yeah. So let's just pay nervous about my own identities, okay, in the interactions in that. Yeah. So let's just hold all of that as we move into our space together. Excellent. Lack of intersectionality in the stuff, NPHCs are in our leadership programs. All right. This last question is just for us to see where I might put some emphasis. I've got like 3 slides. I'm going to move through some things and then open it up for us to be in dialogue with questions and responses. So please, as Vernon said, you can use the chat, and then at one point I'll just pause and open it up and invite you in. But are there any specific questions that you want to make sure that you hope you said, oh, you look, I said, I'm going to that because I hope we talk about this, or I hope we explore this. That would be helpful to me. So I just want to give you a moment to get that in the room. Okay. How do we help them as African? Okay, let's see. How can we help them to to ask for, okay, ask for help. Okay. All right. When they need it. Okay. Right. All right. Promising practices. Okay. Right. How to investigate Black men, how to navigate as Black men in higher education. Right. How can create organizational, cultural. Mm-hmm. What are some unique? Mm-hmm. Access to our space. Yep. Consider how to engage prospective lead programs. Frameworks of leadership. Yes, very, very good. Good stuff. Good. So much of what I'm going to be sharing will kind of speak to some of the things that you all are naming. And when we get to the question and answer space or open space, if it doesn't get addressed, let's just bring that back into the room. Is that all right? That's how we're going to move forward in our time together today. These are really good. So I want to start with this whole notion of who are Black men, right? And one of the things that feels really important to me is that we always hold the truth of context before content. So I invited you to first consider the context of, kind of your type of institution. The bigger level of context is where your institution is, right? And so are we in the South? Are we in the North? Are we in the Midwest? Right? So that's another piece that matters and is important, right? So context before the content. So as you consider that context, right? I want you to hold that, and we all know Black men are not a monolith, right? And so it's not we not just all one thing. But what I also want us to hold is that there is a collective experience, right? And so while all of Black male experiences are not the same, there is this collective dynamic and experience that Black men navigate. That simply being in the room as is important for us to be able to hold, right? But to be able to hold the diversity in terms of the ways. Where do our Black men come from? So some of the times that the work is challenging is because we've not really considered that the majority of the Black men that we recruit and that come here are from this place. What do we know about that place, right? And so are they coming from largely predominantly white schools and systems and spaces where they've navigated? Are they coming from predominantly Black communities? Are they coming from first generations? Are they coming? What is bringing them to the school? Where do they come from, right? And what do we know about where folks are coming from? It just gives us some information, holding not a monolith, but giving us a sense, right, of what folks might be bringing in terms of what their experience is. The next thing connected to that is we're talking about leadership and leadership development is what has been their experience and involvement with leadership, right? And so sometimes we think about folks' experience and involvement with leadership as having been in leadership positions formally or having been participated in leadership programs, but not necessarily so, right? When I talk about my own early leadership experiences, my first leadership experience was as a safety in my elementary school, right? So I was, kind of like I stood there and, kept people from crossing the street so they didn't get hit by cars. And I stood in the hallways in the school to monitor running up and down the steps so people didn't injure themselves. So that was my leadership positions, right? And then as I think about kind of moving beyond that, there are other things that I did that might not have been in a formal title or role, but my experience with leadership. And so what I want us to think about as we consider Black men is if we ask them, what's been your experience with leadership? What would they say? Do they see themselves as leaders? How have they worked with leaders? right? If I asked you to name 3 leaders in your life, who would we be naming and talking about, and so on, okay? So it gives us a sense, we want to get a sense of how they frame leadership, right? Uh, Back in the late 90s, um, so Dr. Kevin Kruger, who's president of NASPA, Nancy Young, and myself, we all did, we were doing a leadership development work, early days of, kind of formalizing leadership development in the context of higher ed and student affairs programs. And we were deliberately and intentionally looking at the experience of minoritized students, right? And discovering what it meant, in fact, to reframe what leadership was, and the definitions of that. So I invite you to consider, how are we engaging Black men around their own understanding and their own defining of leadership, right? And so maybe the program, even the naming of the program as a leadership development program or experience or emerging leader, might be the disconnect, right? So we want to think about how we get that information. And then the last piece here under this first one is, how are people invited to participate? Right? How do we get folks involved? Is it just kind of this mass invitation, emerging leader to especially for the programs where folks get to opt in? Like, I know that a number of us have programs where, because of your position, you have to be in it, right? Or you have to participate in this, right? So you have to go to this retreat, or because of your position or title or whatever. RAs, orientation leaders, those kinds of things, leaders of student organizations, and so on. But in terms of the leadership classes or leadership development programs that folks get to opt in and to see why it matters in their life, how do we invite them? Where do we go to invite them? Where are the invitations? Are they, how are people tapped? Is it word of mouth? How are we engaging? How do we get folks to see? And particularly, who is inviting Black men? Right? Who's inviting? Um, and we all know about, well, if Vernon invite me to the party, I'm going, because I know what the party gonna be, right? Because I've seen his Facebook, right? So, who's inviting, and what has been the enticing thing about what's the level of relationship and the level of trust in the inviter, right? In your context. Is that landing, folks? Is that making sense to you, right? So who's doing that, right? So as we start.
Well, and
So context, yeah. Was there a question?
no, Jamie, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say, what's really resonating with me is this piece around, how are we defining our leadership programs, and are they resonating with students?
Mm-hmm.
And we know from research that specifically students of color, Black men,
Mm-hmm.
look at community involvement before they look at campus involvement.
Right.
And are we engaging those community involvement spaces?
There it is.
Because Terrell Strayhorn does some great research on, his experience in the gospel choir,
That's right. Mm-hmm.
and how that was his very first connection on his campus as an undergrad. But the leadership development office did not see that as a leadership experience,
Right.
and wouldn't allow him to even add it to his leadership transcript, which makes no sense. It makes no sense.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. So again, it is the reframing and redefining of what leadership means, and how are we tapping into those spaces, right? As we engage. I want to move us because and Vernon, please jump in, or if anyone has a question, please make sure you're putting that in the chat as we are moving particular considerations um, as we return on campus activities to take into account traumas and accomplishments. Yes, Yes, over this past year. Thank you. Again, that part of the, thank you for that, Martha. Part of what, why I did the feeling check is because we have to be able to engage Black men in the context of all of the emotional trauma and labor and experience that they are continuing to navigate, right? But that heavy stuff over this last year. Some other things to consider, given what I just said. What's the dominant narrative about Black men on your campus, right? So when people talk about Black men, what's the things that come in their mind, right? So what's the dominant narrative? On many campuses that I work with and have been on, Black men is code for athlete or euphemism, because that's the only place we got them, right? That's the only place we've been actively recruiting. That's how we get our Black male population. And so, you know, the dominant narrative is that all Black men are athletes. And so how does that impact what we do in terms of our leadership programs and efforts, right? That our Black men are first generation, right? How does that impact, right, our programs or what we do? And so being able to first engage the dominant narrative and just, you know, pay attention to how that has impacted the way you have attempted to engage Black men in leadership. Who's gotten left out of that, right? Who doesn't get seen? And how do we unintentionally create a narrative of not Black male enough, right? And so if Blackness here means that you are an athlete and you are not a Black male athlete, and all of our programs and efforts around Black maleness center around Black male athletes, then I'm not Black male enough, right? So to pay attention to what's the narrative and how does that show up in your leadership? Where and how do you engage the topic of leadership? Again, like Vernon said, are we doing community service, community engagement? Are we considering the gospel choir? Are we considering those spaces? I'm going to talk a little bit more about opportunities as we move forward. But how do we widen our lens to consider leadership beyond just kind of this formal position, role, RHA, student government, honor society, ambassador space, right? Those positions to think about Black males in leadership. What models and images of leadership are used? What are we using, right? And so when we think about this, when we're putting up images, when we're talking about leaders, when we're having people to come to campus to talk about leadership, when we're talking about examples of excellence and so on, how do Black men see themselves? Do you know, beyond President Obama, right? And we're grateful for President Obama's. Beyond President Obama, how and what are the images of Black male leadership do we see, right? And what's the again, what's the narrative around that? Because one of the dynamics is when we put up images of Black male leaders, it is often a leadership framework that fits the dominant white narrative, right? And so are we showing leaders that represent the breadth of difference in the ways that Black men show up? Do they have to show up wide enough in order to be seen as leaders and as effective, right? So how do we look at what other images of leadership look like beyond, again, stop using Martin Luther King quotes, right? Can we use some others? Exactly, right? In terms of Black male leadership. And then do your leadership programs and efforts allow for the diversity of the Black male experience? And that's what I'm kind of speaking to, right? And so can we allow an image of Black male leadership, Black male excellence beyond those who just look like they got a 4.0 in college and were in the honor society and are off to, be the next President Obama, right? Do we see and can we help Black men to see themselves as leaders? If that's not their story, that's not going to be their path, right? And how do we engage that diversity as opposed to, having and forming and positioning? I've worked with lots of Black male initiative programs that are preparing Black men to be white enough. So the day that you have to look professional, right? When professional dress is this is how you have to talk. This is how you have to be. And the challenge that I'm offering is that is done without an analysis of white supremacy, right? Without an analysis of white privilege, without that analysis. So it's one thing if you say, so here's the dynamic, right? This is what we know is going to help you in this current context be successful. But we need you to understand that that's about this. And you get to challenge that. You get to decide not to be that. And it's from everything from hair, dress, speak, all of the things that define goodness, rightness, excellence, and so on, right? And so it is important that we acknowledge and that we pay attention to how sometimes unintentionally we collude in the process of whiteness and white supremacy that perpetuate the dynamic that Black men being themselves can never be enough. All right. I'm going to pause there and take a deep breath because I know that was what I had to navigate and own my participation in that process. That early on in my professional career, I worked to make Black men, acceptable to white people, right? And getting clear about that without an analysis of, and so when they weren't, then I made them the problem and not systemic racism, right? When they wouldn't do it right, it was them being the problem and not the problem of systemic racism.
Well, and Jamie, my sense is that you did this from a place of care and love.
Absolutely. That's right.
Not
That's right.
intentionally harmful.
That's right. Exactly.
But still, the impact of that, what does it mean? And
that's right.
And absolutely.
Right. Not having, so again, that was having done some more of my own work to interrogate how whiteness showed up in me, right? Mm-hmm. And my own internalized and unconscious stuff. I'm going to just do a couple of last things and invite some questions and some comments and so on. This is great. So the last piece is I just want to talk about opportunities, right? So there's all kinds of opportunities to engage. And not just the presidents of organizations and so on, but how are we going where they are, right? And not just needing them to come to us and our stuff, right? So how are we partnering with the folks who are leading and supporting and working these areas? So we know that in many places, a great space is Greek life, right? And so, and how we engage Black maleness. But here's the trick. Certainly we want to engage in PHC organizations and the minority serving organizations. But what about in our predominantly white organizations who are so excited that we have one? Oh, we got one. We got two. We got three Black brothers. We got, and so and again, not from a mean or spirited place, but how about in those places we talk about race and the dynamics of what, as we're doing our rituals and things, what does this mean as a Black man to be in this space? So how are we talking about the nuance and the experiences of Black male leaders? We're preferring all these Greek leaders, but are we talking about race in those spaces so that Black men can find their voice in that space and not feel like they have to be silent around how being a Black man in a predominantly white house matters, right? So don't just talk about race or do Black male leadership stuff within PHC. do it across all of those spaces. Same thing with athletics, right? Sometimes it's like, well, we know the football team or the basketball team, we know we've got a large number of potentially Black male athletes in those spaces. How are we engaging race and the experience of Black men in all sports? What did it look like on the swim team or the golf team or the tennis team or the other space? Intramurals are other opportunities to go to and engage. Again, this is a partnership. Your spaces. I have music spaces, and I mean that across the board, right? All of these opportunities. What's the music departments and music spaces and opportunities for engagement? So whether that is choirs, jazz band, marching bands, all of the spaces around music, informal music spaces, DJs. DJs are very powerful leaders, right? And to consider what would it look like to have a leadership program and experience for DJs or folks or music, so to capture the spaces that matter. Academic programs, and certainly we know that in Africana studies or in ethnic studies, that's going to be a space. And so what does it look like to lead as an activist, right? And to navigate systems that often our Black student unions, our African student unions, our Caribbean student union leaders find themselves often at odds with institutions, as we're particularly given the context of this last year, as we're navigating all of the energy, the harm, and the work. And so how do we help folks to, particularly Black men in these spaces, know that there are all kinds of ways to lead, right? And so that one of the dynamics of being particularly in minoritized space is that leadership can get seen in one way, that you can't lead unless you burning down the campus, right? And how do we create space for the need for all of our ways and styles of showing to show up? Community service opportunities, SGA, and others. These are some opportunity spaces to engage the dynamics of Black leadership. I'm going to pause there and open it up to some questions, some comments, and then I'll go to my final thoughts. Any questions or comments or reactions or join that really resonated? So you can go to the reaction button and raise your hand, and I'll just call on you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Vernon? Okay, was that Matthew?
It is. Hello,
yeah,
brother.
Come on in. Yeah.
Hello, 06 to you, brother.
Yes, up, Fred.
My question is, I typed it in the chat. How does one separate what is viewed as a culture of excellence versus perspectives of Western Hemisphere views of professionalism? Like the comment the gentleman made earlier was about, haven't worn a tie in years, but we know in our culture, you may be raised from a household that you weren't taught how to tie a tie. You weren't taught, so how do you, balance what is perceived to be viewed as what should be excellent versus, or somebody's standard of excellence.
That's right.
Versus, knowing how to code switch and navigate.
That's right.
And what is viewed as a Western Hemisphere, what is professional.
Well, you're right. You're right on naming it. And I think, Matthew, what you're naming is, brother, simply naming that is important, right? And so that one of the dynamics that, and naming that, not again, just in Black male space, right? But definitely in Black male space, so that Black men can hear and understand and decide, because one of the things that I used to do was I used to say, you need to dress, wear this, act like, but I didn't set the context for why that mattered. And again, like I said, I made them wrong if they didn't. If you want to be successful, you need to know how to do this the right way. I didn't say the right way, I said the right way, right? Because in my mind, I had the right way be the white way. So then we never shift systems. We never challenge the dominant narrative by continuing to and then hold those who participate in that up as the best and the brightest. Those are the ones who get the awards at the end of the year. Those are the ones who get recognized. Those are the ones who get called on. But those who decide, no, sir, thank you, I think I'm going to continue to engage in this way and do powerful things, but because they don't do it in the way, then they're not as seen as. And so we have to pay attention to what we're rewarding as well in that space and what we're honoring. Alonzo, I see your hand, and then Douglas.
Hello, also, hello, good brother.
Right.
My question along the same lines, sort of like how I was talking about in the chat, black men participate because I'm present in the space and because they see me and they see themselves in the space. I was also, thinking about, what you were saying about, how you yourself or like me myself am upholding certain structures while also not naming it. So my question is more so about where's the balance, also thinking about myself and my positionality, thinking of me very low on the totem pole at my institution, thinking about like who needs to hold the emotional labor, like who's doing the work, and like how are other colleagues also doing the work, because it's not just my work, it's my life.
Absolutely.
So like my thing is like, just like how you're talking about naming it, there's also like a perseverance and a grit aspect to wanting to maintain my livelihood and my job.
Yep.
While also trying to create space for Black men besides myself to be authentic in these white spaces. So my question is basically about like, where's the balance exist?
And Alonzo, you are asking $1 million question, right? So I could shut down and be drinking right now in the middle of the afternoon if I had the answers to all of that. But this notion that you're naming the truth of, what's the balance, right? And that's contextual, right? Do I have senior leaders who get it, so that when I put out the emotional labor in the spaces that I have to name, when there's pushback, right, around that, I know somebody got my back, right? I know folks are going to be able to, show up saying, well, absolutely, that is absolutely right, and we know that, and we're gonna, we're working to shift the cultures and do this differently. If you're in an environment where you the senior level Black person on your campus, right, then it's like, okay, you already said I'm lower on the totem pole, right? And I'm the senior level Black person, and I've been that, right? Then you navigate in this whole tension around, it's not just about me, maybe it's about my family as well, right? I've seen people get blackballed, right, or excluded, limited in terms of the access and what they get that, Alonzo's good over there, right? That's where we want to keep him, and then not opportunities and all that kind of stuff. So there is a tension, Alonzo, and we do have to, and so what do we do? And that's why these kind of spaces are important, so that those who have different positionality in terms of power and opportunity, that we have to be naming some of this stuff, right? So I sit in a space where I get to say all this stuff, right? And because I have an opportunity and a platform in which to name it and to call other people's voice in to that conversation, so that all of the labor is not on you. So it should make your lifting lighter. There is some lifting that you're still going to have to do, because they're going to hear you in some ways, the younger Black men that you're engaging, and they need to hear your voice. At the same time, as well as your peers, right? So you're going to be that voice around your peers, and for some of your leadership, you're going to be that voice, but it should not be just you. And as we are in these spaces, we have to look at what's our role as leaders. I saw directors, I saw executive directors on here. What's my role to help lighten the load for Alonzo? Douglas, I saw you, I'm sorry.
No worries. By the way, I'm the guy who hasn't worn the tie in over 20 years.
Yeah.
And to put that in context, I'm an attorney.
Okay.
I spend my days representing students here at our university in front of our judges, and I've only had one judge who ever said anything about it, and he's no longer a judge, so I really don't care. But my I guess question or point here is that is that sometimes we got this image of what we're supposed to look like and how we're supposed to behave. In my world, they refer to a civility in the practice of law. And I've said to people, and this is probably why I'm not quite so popular with some folks, I said that definition of civility is based on a white, female, suburban person. It has got nothing to do with who I am. So how do we as a group stand up and say, excuse me, whole new standard, I'm not doing it your way, I'm going to do it my way. Now, I will grant you, I have the benefit of lots of gray hair, a big kind of burly beard, right? That whole thing. I stand 6 foot tall and, well, I'm heavier than I should be. But how do we as a group stand up and say, no, you got to stop doing this? One of the most interesting experiences I've ever had on my campus, I had 2 women sitting at my desk. We had done all of our business. And I said, okay, now what can I do for you? And they said, we just want to sit here. And I said, why? I said, because it is so rare for us to see a Black man in charge of anything who has any kind of authority, and we just want to revel in it for a minute. Okay, that means all of us need to step up and stand up regardless of how somebody else sees us and say, this is who I am. I'm here to do the job. I'm capable. But how do we kind of garner the strength to do that as a group, not just one here and one there, but as a group?
That's right. You're again, and how do we, create the spaces, name the stuff, and what you said so beautifully, Douglas, is if I'm doing my work well, Alonzo will not have to wait till his beard looks like this to be able to speak what you just spoke. Right? It shouldn't take, I shouldn't have to be the oldest person in the room, right? Or I've gotten to the place where I don't just give a flying fluky, right? It shouldn't have to take that, right? And so I recognize that my grandfather did not have the space to do some of the things that my father got to do, and my father didn't have the space to do some of the things that I got to do. And likewise, those who come behind me, right, should be able to do some things, right, differently. And they shouldn't have to wait till they're 40 to recognize the dominant narrative is one that's about conformity to white supremacy, right, or white analysis. So that we have to begin to talk this stuff unapologetically earlier, and it has to not just be Black people, right? There's we could do a whole nother session and piece around how anti-Blackness plays out in this conversation, right? What's expected and so on and so forth. So absolutely, you're right on in that. I know we're getting close to time, and I know that I have to run to a 2 o'clock, but I do want to share some final thoughts with you as we are in this space today. And so what I want to just offer you is some final thoughts are these things. So I want you to just stay to, as we talk about Black men, we must challenge the deficit mindset when we engage Black male leadership. So we're not trying to fix them, right? We're not trying to get them together, right? Yes, we recognize that some of us are rough around the edges around some ways of engaging or being, but we want to talk about that as not making them the problem, right? We must deepen our understanding of cultural wealth and what their way of being or experience and how that is additive and a value add to leadership, right? And understanding. So that I really want to help us get that we're not trying to fix Black men and by thus making Black men the problem. There are some systemic problems that we are trying to help them navigate through, but they're not the problem. There must be a willingness, right, to for persons to make a difference by investing in the emotional and cognitive well-being of Black male students. And so what I mean by that is we've got to hold Black men in their full range of emotions. Tired, frustrated, ready to give up in full rage, but also in some joy and some I don't give, right? I'm not letting you define me or decide who I am. And we can't be mad or shut down or write off Black men who's like, I don't want people to be a part of none of that. Right? I don't need it. I'm not being defined by it. I'm not connecting to it. And so hold us and still invest in them. That's the thing. And still invest, because Alex is going to be that brother that is able, because I haven't written you off because you didn't show up like you were supposed to show up, then you're going to be the voice that makes a difference in their life, right? And so we must be willing to do that level of investment. And then the last one is, don't forget, we're all trying to figure it out. Like, there's no absolute one right way or answer. And, I appreciate his brother Alonzo was naming there that, and his brother Douglas is naming there, that every day we are moving and navigating the world as Black men. And every time something happens, particularly to a Black man, we are thinking about ourselves, our brothers, our sons, our grandsons, and what that means as we attempt to show up in the world as contributions and leaders. So we're all trying to figure it out. And what we're just hoping through this conversation is that we don't have to figure it out by ourselves. And we don't have to do all of the heavy lifting alone, but we've got some support and some folks in it with us. Thank you.
Reverend Doctor, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. What a great conversation. Just to let folks know, this is being recorded, so you'll get a link next week that you can share with others. Please use it as professional development to talk with others about this topic. We've had some people tell us that they really enjoyed using these on their campus to sort of engage some of these topics. So please, please, please continue to do that. But as we wrap up, just want to make sure that you know that LeaderShape is here to support you in our programs. So please reach out to us as you think about leadership development programs. Just a shout out to Jamie. We actually, prior to the pandemics, we had an institute session for African-American men that we did for several years. And Jamie was one of the first faculty in that program. And we're so excited to bring that back in some way soon, but just the energy and the community that was developed in those sessions was just amazing. And it really shows some of the things that we're doing on our campuses that really speak to this. So definitely keep us in mind as you think about some of your leadership programs, and know that we're a not-for-profit, and we would love to ask you to consider donating to us if you're able. Because we only do the things we do because we have people like you that support us. So thank you all once again. Reverend Doctor, you are a gift to us, just in all of your conversation. I'm so glad I muted myself because there were too many times where I was going, yeah. So, but thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all.